Hi, my name's Francis Vigent. This is my colleague Judy Higgins, and we're from No Atom. We're going to be talking today about how learning happens at the point of challenge. Both of us spend a good amount of time in the classroom. Judy over 30 years, and spent about a decade myself. And a good portion of that time, we also taught with No Atom resources in a next generation model of instruction. So as we approach this topic, we want to focus on this idea of challenge and learning and how the two interact. I think the first thing that might make sense for us to discuss, Judy, is what are the things that might, and I've seen this in my own classroom, I've seen this in colleagues' classrooms, but I'd love to get your insight on what is mistaken for learning and challenge. What are some of the things that as teachers we might point to at times as learning and challenge, but actually we might be kind of fooling ourselves a little bit because I feel like I've done that to myself at times.
Mhm, mhm. This topic actually made me think a lot because I thought back on my years of teaching and the things that I thought were challenge or learning. And what I always looked for many, many years ago, before I was challenged in my teaching, was knowing the answer. Do you know the answer? The answer that I was planning for you to know,
Hmm.
the answer that I expected, the answer that was going to, show that I was teaching, they were learning. I also looked for completing the assignment, and the assignment was often just an app complete expectations. I taught, you completed the assignment, I graded it, you did well or you didn't. And one of the things that I looked for as challenge, and I cringe to think about this now, but may have even been something like how quickly you completed the
Hmm.
assignment.
Hmm.
And that that's just incredible to me, but I forgive myself. It was the way we taught. But I do think about it a lot because it's so, we can get so easily stuck on that. And that all seems very safe. And the other thing that I thought about that we did all the time that is really hard to think about, we would have, I taught over my years, I taught third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade for various spans of years. And we would often do something like if a fifth grader completed the assignment and seemed like they knew, quote unquote, everything, we would actually give them assignments from the next year, like the fourth grader would get a fifth grade assignment. And, and that there's so many things wrong with that. And,
Like
it was,
what? I guess, it's funny, like you and I are shaking our heads at that a little bit, but other people might still be doing that. Like, what are some of those things that you think of that are you kind of reasons you regret doing that?
well, one of it was very disconnected from the learning that we were doing.
Mm.
The other issue is and I remember this so well, is the fifth grade teacher saying, what are you doing?
Mm.
We're teaching them that next year.
Mhm.
Now what do we all do? But, and I mean, I make fun of that, but that shows my lack of, I can't think of anything else to do. So of course,
Mm.
this is the next natural step.
Mhm.
And looking at the way that we look, learning and understanding now, there are so many places that we could have gone to where we're diving more deeply into what is the topic,
Mhm.
where I would be prepared with so many entry ways for students who, and looking at challenge, you can look at challenge in so many different ways. So I could provide a problem to be solved, a question to be answered
Mhm.
in something like a no Adam investigation. And
Mhm.
there are so many ways that we can go about that, that every single student can be satisfied and can be challenged in the
Mhm.
way that they are going to look at, learn about, attack this challenge.
Mhm.
And that's sort of, I think the most wonderful thing is the natural differentiation that we have,
Mhm.
that there's lots of different entry levels and there's lots of different ways that you can go in terms of challenging everyone. There's
Mhm.
lots of different ways that a prototype can be built,
Mhm.
planned, looked at. There's
Mhm.
so many different ways that a discussion can happen depending
Mhm.
on the level of every student's understanding.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I can identify with a lot of the things you've shared, and especially the idea that, well, a few things. When I started my career, I started as a high school math teacher, and when you think about quizzes and tests and assignments and assessments, I can certainly identify with the idea that, boy, if kids are done really quickly, that was either too close to what we did in class, it wasn't challenging enough, it, wasn't worthwhile, they didn't have to struggle at all, this sort of a thing. And then at the same time, you're not trying to trick the children, like you're not trying to try to be, frustrating or something like that. So
Mhm.
trying to find and figure out what challenge was and what was appropriate. But then looking to these things, like you said, like how long does it take to do this? It's really not a good metric at all. It has nothing to do with the value of of the task. And
Mhm.
then in terms of the learning, it's, for me, the question becomes like, well, what is learning? What is challenge? Because again, from a learning standpoint, if we're looking for students to give us, as you said, sort of the answer that we're looking for, which I can identify with that as well. You come up with a bunch of questions, everybody gets the same set of questions, everybody gets the same answer, matches the answer key, A plus. It's pretty kind of straightforward. But does that mean they've learned? Could they potentially be giving me that answer and have no understanding at all?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's, I think, when you start asking yourself those questions as a teacher or somebody asks them of you in terms of the quality of the instruction that you're delivering, it can be really unsettling and actually scary.
Well, and I think that, probably one of the first changes that I started making was when I would ask a question, is creating the expectation that a student was going to answer it, but explain, like, what makes you say that? And I think that was when I started understanding how much I had mistaken. Oh,
Mhm.
I thought they had it. But now
Mhm.
that I'm requiring, can
Mhm.
you explain to me how you got that answer? Can you explain what that means?
Mhm.
Can somebody add on to this particular explanation?
Mhm.
And widening. And that was really exciting for me as a teacher, because then I could truly tap into, do like you were just saying, they might give the answer, but really not have any understanding of the answer at all. I
Mhm.
did a lot of learning that I could spit back. I did very, very well on tests. And there's a multitude of things that I didn't remember. I didn't need to, didn't
Mhm.
remember, I didn't have to remember it beyond the next week. So I was memorizing and spitting out, but not not understanding it in with any depth at all.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's sort of similar in my experience. I guess when a big shift for me is the learning learning's really about what children can do. with
with
what
it.
they've gained.
Mhm.
And a lot of these sort of surface strategies that students develop, or the teachers even encourage children to develop in order to get a known answer, the right answer, the answer that we want, don't really produce any value for life, for being
Mhm.
able to use what's learned. It just, like a mnemonic, might be useful for recalling something in a particular order, or, you know, and there are things, don't get me wrong, that you have to memorize, you have to know. You know, it it is what it is, but you can't really get too far with just that. And it's
Mhm.
not that useful, especially in the world we live in, with you don't even have to go to a book anymore. You have the internet. You don't even have to be able to type anymore. You can use your voice. And with things like ChatGPT and other AI tools, you at this point it's almost reduced to the level of being able to ask the question to get the information you want. So it's you don't even have to know what you're searching for. So learning in my mind is really about creating a shift in students' thinking, but a shift in such a way that they're developing an understanding and a connectedness to content in some way that they can really generalize and use it. And it's not only in and see, I'm falling into that trap talking about content, but it's not only about the content, but it's about the skills and the thinking related to that content, because content's static in a sense. You know,
Mhm.
rocks are made of minerals, and Earth's atmosphere has so many layers and comprised of different things. But what can you really do with that?
Mhm.
How can
Right.
you think about it? How can you work with that and connect it to something to make more out of it? And so that's what led me to think of the kind of challenges that were in my classroom differently, and the challenge that were in the tasks I was creating differently, because um, what I began to think about was, how do I, for lack of a better way of saying this, how do I get students on the record making connections, so
Mhm.
that I can begin working with, and we can all begin working with what they think. What we need
Yes.
a starting point.
Yes.
And then if I can challenge them to connect and to offer me what they think, now I have an opportunity to begin challenging that, like shifting it, causing shifts by making them interact, take that and interact with things, tasks, challenges, to try to learn. And that, to me, that was learning in my class. It was like, okay, let's challenge your thinking. And then that may reinforce, what you discover may reinforce what you understand, or it may completely shift it in an unknown way. So kind of, again, back to what you were saying a moment ago about meeting students where they're at, and differentiating in a way that is really unique to the student and meeting their needs. This Whatever a student thinks is what they think. It's not what I think. And so if we can get that out there, we can begin working with it. That gives every student a different entry point, as you were
Yeah.
mentioning.
And Francis, the other thing I want to mention that I think is so important that I also recognized about my teaching many, many years ago, we were focusing on students who may be getting all the right answers, but they haven't really learned or understood anything. But we've also got that other side with that student who did not get the right answers, who is not talking in class, but they may in fact understand a lot, but we haven't taken the time to tap in. We haven't understood. They may have a lot in there, but they don't know how to talk about it. They're not sure if they're correct. And we weren't using tools like helping them make connections. And I think about that a lot as I'm able to teach differently now. And like you say, everybody's got things going on. So let's tap into that. We talk about making thinking visible so the teacher can understand and the student can understand what is going on. And oh, maybe that student there was a lot of understanding going on there. There was a lot of learning going on. I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't giving them the support
Mm-hmm.
to be able to, sometimes their challenge was just speaking up. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't whether or not they knew the right answer. It was speaking up and giving them the space to make their thinking known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned making thinking visible, which is a book by Ron Richert and I believe Mark Church. And I want to credit him, I believe, with coining the term learning happens at the point of challenge, because I think it is really captures the truth of what, from a research perspective, but also anecdotally, what needs to be happening and should be happening and often happens in the highest performing classrooms. And for those that aren't the highest performing, one of the things we need to consider, is it happening? How could it be happening? And and I think that what you just mentioned, Judy, kind of brings up another point, which is, if learning isn't getting the right answer, if learning is developing an understanding by having connections and thoughts and beliefs challenged in relation to real life phenomena and just how things work when we test them, we prototype them. Um, and that challenge being ho holding the cognitive work,
Mhm.
the cognitive load, the intellectual work as a student, owning that, being invested in it, um, and the challenge of having to kind of connect the dots and reason, extend reasoning, um, when we think of sort of cognitive rigor. For yourself in your practice, and maybe some others you've seen, how do you find the line between what's productive and unproductive when it comes to struggle? Because I think people, and I just want to tell you why I bring this up, is that I think, um, in my practice, and I once I went down the learning and challenge path and had my road to Damascus moment, um, I felt much better about challenge, and it never bothered me to push students hard. And not hard in the sense of made for TV movie breaking kids, kind of thing. Hard in the sense of, I would push them to a point that I thought it was a little bit beyond them, because I
Mhm.
wanted to see if I was wrong. I wanted to give them a chance to prove me wrong, and they almost always did. I mean, it's just interesting, the depth of what kids are capable of when you really truly challenge them. So I asked this question because I got comfortable with that really quickly. But other folks, colleagues of mine, people I've worked with, and so on, when children struggle, it's often a sign for teachers, or a sense, it sparks or triggers a sense of anxiety where I need to rush in and save these kids.
Mhm.
I'm hurting them. Um, I need to stop what I'm doing. And so the very good-natured, heartfelt desire for a teacher to do good in the world actually works against them in that moment, because instead of creating challenge, they protect children from challenge. It feels like to me. So I wanted to ask you, like, how do you find the line between productive and unproductive struggle?
There's a lot. This is such a great question. It was interesting. About a week ago, I happened upon an article about productive struggle, and it was really interesting because it was very much on the side of, this is a terrible thing that we're doing to kids. These poor kids, they're scared, they don't know what to do. And it was a very frustrating article to read
mm,
because it wasn't like a conversation that I could say, wait, let me talk about what it really is. And there was so much misunderstanding around this and so much of just that panic that teachers feel, parents feel, this is mean, this is awful, kids don't know what to do.
mm,
And that's so wrong. That's so wrong because it's not productive struggle
mhm,
if kids just don't know what to do. We're
mhm,
not just throwing them into this fight and saying, you're fourth graders, now you go do seventh grade work and
mhm,
don't come talk to me until you've got it done.
mhm,
My belief is that one of the really important things that we have to do is, I want to call struggle something different or make struggle feel okay. We've got to normalize struggle. We've got to
mm,
reward struggle. Struggle is great.
mhm,
Struggle is powerful. Struggle is, like thinking about marathon runners and those powerful things. And we sort of get that in the athletic,
mhm,
we're talking about things like that. And then we somehow lose that when we're talking about education. And I recently talked with a lot of teachers about learning begins at the point of challenge. And we had a lot of conversations about struggle. And one of the teachers said, which I liked so much, she said, I hear everything you're saying, and I agree with everything that you're saying. But last week, a teacher called me and said, we need to meet because your student is struggling. And she said, I immediately panicked. I thought, what's wrong? This is terrible. And she said, I forgot, that wait, this is a good thing to struggle. Let's talk about struggle. Let's normalize struggle. So I think that we have to create a safe space for
mhm,
struggle and
mhm,
have students understand that we'll support them with the struggle. There's lots of different things that can help you
mhm,
struggle.
mhm,
And struggling, really helping students understand, that's what sets your brain on fire. That's when things become exciting and interesting and helping students think about a time that they were so curious. They really wanted to figure something out,
mhm,
to talk about how did that feel. And then, so you've got to create a space in your classroom where it's safe to struggle. It's safe not to know the answers. It's safe to kind of be frustrated. I'm frustrated right now.
mhm,
And to have that common language so that we can talk about those feelings.
mhm,
And then, you know, for the teacher to talk about their own struggles, because we all
mhm.
have struggles. And I think that was another thing sort of in the old days of teaching. We
Right.
didn't talk about those things. We didn't talk about our own struggles. And, it was so much fun when I was teaching math and I could talk with students about, yeah, I really, struggled with this. And I'm not sure why. And then suddenly, when I could work in a group and other students could help me understand it in different ways, when I started making connections.
Mhm,
So when I can talk about, struggling and that it's a good thing and it's a very powerful thing, but to also help students be willing to struggle when they understand that there's a lot of different entry points.
mhm,
And we're going to help them with that. Not everyone is going to be expected to learn at the same rate, learn in the same ways.
mhm,
That some of you are going to have to go back in and, oh, I need to go back in, the book that I was reading, I need to go back in and recheck that, or I need to have a discussion with someone. I need to
mhm,
look at the group. I don't understand how yours is working. Would you mind if I ask some questions? So helping students realize that they don't have to struggle alone.
Hmm.
They don't have to do exactly what this person and this person is doing. I can do this another way. I recently watched a group of students. They were building slingshots, and they were seeing, how far they could make the ball go. That was the goal. And it was such a wonderful experience because there was so much struggle, but so much joy,
Hmm.
because they would come to like the launch pad. There was a launch pad in the middle of the classroom, and they could just,
Hmm.
teach, I'm ready.
Hmm.
And some of them would just, you know, it would barely go, it would just drop at the bottom.
Hmm.
And there was such joy around. I would hear so many things like, okay, okay, I think I know why that happened. I
Hmm.
think I have some thoughts. Let's go back. There was
Hmm.
another student who watched another group do it, and they had
Hmm.
done it in a completely different way than he had. And he said, I thought of something that I think those two could really try. I have an idea. Ran over to the group to share his idea.
Hmm.
And it was such an amazing thing because there was an equal amount of things that did not work well, as there were pretty good successes. Some were wildly successful, but not
Hmm.
many. But there was never a sense of, I give up. I don't know what to do next.
Right.
Because there were multiple ways. There were all kinds of different materials they could use. There were lots of ways to solve this problem.
Hmm.
And there was lots of support.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it was just a great lesson. I think about that particular classroom a lot in terms of productive struggle,
Hmm.
because even with those teams that got up 4 and 5 times, there was
Hmm.
always, okay, I have another idea. Like, this is amazing.
Right, right. It's like they never run out of ideas, which is great, which is exactly what you want, right?
Exactly.
I think of you bring up sports, and I think it's a really interesting analogy to me because I mean, imagine a, s- a class. Let's say we had a class on running, and the goal of the class is that you learn how to run a 5-minute mile, and you have 20 kids show up, and 10 of them run and they run a 5-minute mile and they get an A, and then everybody else doesn't. And we
Yeah,
give them C's and D's and F's, or ones and four, all these things. Like, what a crazy concept, right? Like, the kids that show up and are able to do it were able to do it before they ever got there. No learning occurred. It was literally just an assessment, a judgment of what they showed up with.
right,
And like, what's valuable about that? From a teaching perspective and a learning perspective, is children go into a system to improve. Um, not shouldn't be to be just be judged for whatever they walked in the door with.
right,
Um,
right. Because what message am I giving? I
exactly.
again, I worked so hard, but I couldn't do it. But I tried. I did well. I
Hmm.
finished. But that message, well, why even bother with anything? Because
Right,
I'm no good at
right.
this. So yeah,
And that's
that's a
sort of the foundation of like a growth mindset, right? It's the concept of the power of yet, but also this idea that we either have it or we don't. The tortoise and hare concept of the world, which has made its way into the education system in a big way. Um, and by recognizing that, perhaps we can shift it towards really looking at where are children coming to us at, where can we get them to, and 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 creating this environment that you're talking about, an environment for safe struggle, where
yeah,
regardless of how children come to us, whether it's running the 5-minute mile or not, we're going to get them to the 5-minute mile or beyond. And you know, not to play the analogy out too far, but if that's where the kids are at, fine. Let's find out how far we can go. Can you do 5 minutes for 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles? Can we do 3.5 minutes? We need to challenge students from the point that they come to us and really look at grading the growth. And I think that's another thing is people struggle with, well, this idea of learning and challenge and differentiation and meeting students where they're at is great, but I need to give grades. They have to pass tests. They have to pass standardized tests. So, what am I supposed to do about that? And I think the answer there is, it's a couple parts. One is we need to be grading students on growth. We need to look at where they come to us and how far they go incorporating tools and strategies, skills that they're developing to show their learn that how much learning do they show? How much understanding, growth and understanding do they show?
Yeah. Well, and I think, this classroom of kids probably, I would say, well, this was the other good thing. Getting it right didn't mean you had to go X feet. And
Right.
that I thought was really good. I mean, there was somebody who reported how far they'd gone, but they weren't keeping charts. It wasn't, you're going to keep going until you go 10 feet. And I think that was the other thing that was so remarkable to me because I thought they're not given the message that you do not understand, you do not pass this test because you didn't get to 5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
None of that. And there was simply a staggering amount of learning going on because learning why it didn't work that time. All right, learning why it went a little bit further. There was so much, conversation and speculation about why it didn't work. There's as much learning going on as to why it didn't work as
Mm-hmm.
to why it did work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's just such an important thing is there wasn't one right answer
Mm-hmm.
for either the design of the prototype or the distance it had to go. But
Mm-hmm.
such, that I could wander around the classroom and simply ask, well, why are you going to change that? What's your intention there? And stunning amount of understanding
Mm-hmm.
both in that, well, we're thinking that it didn't work last time or it didn't go that far because, and now we're going to try this because.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that incredibly productive struggle where it's not getting hung up on, I give up, or I'm going to go copy theirs because theirs did it. There,
Right.
and I mean, and
Right.
that's, I know as a learner, when I was younger, that was often my, panicky. I have to get a good grade. Let me go
Mm-hmm.
copy somebody else's. That
Mm-hmm.
was the right answer. I learned nothing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that was sort of such a takeaway for me is there isn't necessarily one right goal or one right, way to build this.
Mm-hmm.
There was but so much amazing learning and independence going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What you're saying reminds me of when I thought about this in the early days. It was, okay, struggle is struggle. I think we all kind of like look and oh, someone's struggling, uh, not sure we have a clear definition of what it is, but we know it when we see it. And then the question is like, well, when is that productive and when is that unproductive? And being completely honest, I would ask myself, well, what if a student cries? Like, does that mean that that was unproductive? Was that a bad challenge? Like, what happens? Because like if one student cries, they're not all crying. Like what's going on here? How do I deal with this? Because, things like that might happen.
Yeah.
And what I started to realize was that productive struggles. So for me, the struggle was about the struggle, the struggle was about getting in to the context of the phenomena. So as students are getting into that and they're trying to work with it, um, they might get frustrated. And depending on where a child's frustration tolerance is, which has a lot to do with the way their home life is, the way they've been responded to by parents since they were born or caretakers since they were born, that all of that has to do with how do they process or cope with challenge, or how do they cope with difficult things when they struggle. So so for me, I started to realize that, well, once in a while a student might get a little weepy about something that might be able to, but it doesn't automatically mean that this is an unproductive struggle. It just means that they may be limited in their coping tools. So that's important for me because I can help them with that struggle by helping them to develop those tools and to develop an understanding about struggle and that it's okay and
Mhm.
that we do everybody feels this way sometimes.
Yeah.
And you know, we can approach it, we can, uh, develop some techniques to cope and so on and so forth. Um, so to me, kind of the extreme of struggle, like a student crying in class, and I'm not like laughing, but I'm just sort of like it's awkward when you're in that situation, doesn't necessarily mean that the task is wrong, the struggles to it may be pointing to something else. So then what would an unproductive struggle look like is sort of like, where I would go in my mind. And unproductive struggles are, over time, the more I thought and ran into this, the more I kind of came to the same conclusion. Unproductive struggles occur when there are a lack of tools available to students, when a task is very sort of one-sided in when there's one answer and it's been hidden in a sense. And so, whoever turns over the rock first gets the answer. Like that is unproductive struggle. And maybe one clear maybe example of that would be giving students giving students a challenge that required some kind of specialty knowledge that they would be unlikely to have, or quite frankly, that they would not have had an opportunity to get close to through something that was happening in my class, maybe some reading, maybe a video, maybe just our community. Um, because if we all live if we live in a community next to the river, it's fair game to talk about rivers and things related to that. Is it possible that not every student may have been to that river? Maybe they've driven by it, who knows? But it's reasonable. I think taking students, way outside the box in a way that there's there's no possible pathway, that is an unproductive struggle. Kids, you can't if you can't get there from here, you can't get there from here. And it just is what it is, no matter how much time and how much struggle goes into it. And that's, I think, like in the case of science in particular, people mistake phenomena for a hook. They mistake it for you know, some kind of wrap up demonstration or a launch or something like this. But really, phenomena is a context that we can engage and engross students in processing and thinking about and pulling at and relating to. And if our tasks and the phenomena that we've chosen is good and appropriate, then to your point, there should be a lot of excitement, a lot of connections, a lot of ideas going around. And despite the fact that things are going to get challenging and there might be some struggle, kids are going to be connected and motivated, and they're going to learn to love a challenge, which is, I think, one of, certainly for me, probably my top three goals is helping children learn to love a challenge, because all of the most important things in life are often challenging because otherwise they've been solved. The problem, if it's not challenging, it's been solved. It was easy. It's over. It's history.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think that's really important. And I think it's really important because a struggle can be unproductive also if if there is no formative assessment. So you're not sort of checking in and making sure. And I found that happened in my classroom a lot when I was first, I was doing a new curriculum. I was overwhelmed. I was in a new school district. I had a new curriculum. I was really overwhelmed trying to learn everything. And I was having these expectations about productive struggle, but I wasn't, and you mentioned that earlier, I wasn't giving the support that was needed. I thought I was, but what I realized is that I wasn't doing frequent assessment, just
Mhm,
sitting down in a group, asking questions. And sometimes you can head off that student who's going to fall apart,
mhm,
not realizing, oh, this student was out for a few days, so they weren't in on the discussion. They weren't
mhm,
in when we did, the reading together and had
mhm,
a great discussion. So
mhm,
I think that's really important for being able to release responsibility. So you've got, and that always felt overwhelming to me. Like I felt, how can I possibly do it? There's too many kids, there's too much going on. But once I started realizing, no, it's quick checks, it's quick
mhm,
checks. It's asking
mhm,
some quick questions and getting a lot of information so I could get ahead of maybe that student that was struggling because I was making assumptions, or a group that was just struggling working together. So
mhm,
I think that's another one of those things when struggles are unproductive because they're struggling,
mhm,
they're having a battle over
mhm.
who's going to go pick up the supplies.
Right, right.
And I mean, I think those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure that we're aware of those, because those are the things that can derail
Mhm,
everything.
mhm,
All of a sudden, now we're struggling over something that has nothing to do with learning or what we're doing.
mhm,
Keeping that, and which is the wonderful part when you're freeing yourself from the teacher at the front of the room doing all the talking, you're free to move around and ask questions and check in,
mhm. And
making sure the struggle is productive.
I'm so glad you brought that up because formative assessment checkpoints, things like that, the the value, I got tremendous value out of that as a teacher for myself and my instruction, but also performance outcomes for my kids on so many levels. One, it helped me learn about the quality of my instruction because I was learning about how it was being received by my students.
Mhm.
And it helped me to become better at communicating and clarifying. It also, uh, from a student's perspective, they didn't wander too far in terms of that struggle. They didn't wander off and run away, literally or figuratively, um, because when children start to struggle and when they don't have the tools or supports they need to to get over that, they shut down, they become a behavior issue, they they just manifest things that we don't oftentimes want in the classroom. And so by having these very short and focused formative assessments, particularly through checkpoints where we could interact, it it would spare my students from struggling unproductively for
Yeah.
long if it happened. And it would also, for students who were struggling productively, would reassure them that this was okay. This is normal. This is what to expect. You're not crazy. This is tough.
Hmm.
And the result of all of it was that we were all learning how to learn and learning how to struggle and learning how to support each other. And and I was learning to understand my learners. And you have a new set of students with you, every year, and some folks might have lots of transients, so they may have students that are new much more often than on an annual basis. So that brings up really you know, how do we interact with students so that we're challenging them to learn as opposed to challenging them to get the right answer? Because we started this whole conversation by saying learning isn't about getting the right answers. Learning is about making progress to be able to reason and connect and incorporate skills and content into our understanding in such a way that we really can understand and generalize and synthesize with it. But as a teacher, having a group of students that we talk to for 45 minutes and then we give a 15-minute exit activity that's seeing if they got everything we said is sort of challenging them to give us the answers we want. Um, how do we challenge students to produce learning if that's not learning?
Well, I think where I had to begin, I had to stop asking questions that I had an answer to. And
Mm,
that was a real retraining for me because I got that, I got what I wanted, thinking, all right, I have to, make sure students aren't just spitting things back to me, but I realized, well, I'm still asking them questions
mm,
that I'm actually looking for something. And we talked about this tool, I think in our last episode, but concept mapping was one of my favorite tools that we use in NoAtom. And what that is it's a series of vocabulary presented on a piece of paper. They're in no specific order. And students are simply challenged to make connections.
mm,
And as a teacher, you're not to expect, some students may make one connection, some students may make far more, but there's nothing that I'm expecting. I don't have anything set in my mind. And that for me was so transformative because, first of all, it was fun for me because that was making thinking visible. I could see what they were thinking about as, oh,
mhm,
that's really interesting. Tell me why you connected that. And that led very nicely to my not saying that's right. I needed to know why.
mm,
And that became an expectation in my classroom. And this particular tool was also something we could use throughout the entire time. You may only make one connection now, but after our discussion, go
mm,
ahead, add on to the connections. Are you
mhm,
making more connections? And that was a tool that probably helped me every much as it helped my students, because I started thinking differently and it became really exciting to me. It was so much fun to hear their connections
mm,
because they had different lives than me. They were from
mm,
different places, they had different
mhm,
experiences. And it was just delightful. And it became, this wasn't me standing up and giving out knowledge. It
mhm,
was me learning about my students, learning about their thinking, understanding where they were, being able to catch misconceptions in the moment, but be able to question enough, oh, there is something going on, so we can kind of,
mhm,
that's just such a wonderful, before that we go too far down any road,
mhm,
let's go back and talk about that. So I think that was just such a powerful way for me to change my expectations of my students and start honoring and respecting their
mhm,
thinking and learning.
mhm,
And and that students, they got really confident where, they could they could take risks
Mm-hmm.
of making a connection because they didn't have to worry about was this what Miss Higgins was looking for. So
Mm-hmm.
they take that off the board. And then they also could see that it was something that we could talk through. If they're like, well, these two kind of reminded me of each other, but I'm not sure why. Well, let's talk about it. Who has
Mm-hmm.
something to say? So students start getting more confident and able to start challenging themselves more because I've got other kids here who
Mm-hmm.
can talk about this and who can help me out. I don't have to know all the answer. So I think that's one of the powerful things of being students starting to be able to challenge themselves and take risks, ask other students questions, which is often a scary challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that. So
Mm-hmm.
all those things start to build that ability to feel safe and to take some risks and to realize that challenges can be scary and hard, but they can also be so exciting and so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more that I think that, well, just connecting to the research, first of all, when researchers go into classrooms, they document that on average, 90% of the questions that are asked are review or procedural in nature, which doesn't surprise me because I know I've was there in the early days of my teaching,
Mm.
probably more than 90%. But those review and procedural questions are questions that give you an answer you want. You know, what did we learn yesterday? Who can tell me what fill in the blank. Or I what do we do next? You know, the kind of what are we supposed to be doing? What are we, it's all sort of focused on the role of the teacher being the one who's orchestrating movements in a sense in the classroom. And it makes sense because we have 30 students and one adult, and we're responsible for all these students. So we feel like we need to organize it and really focus on the procedure of the class and what we're doing now, what we're doing next, and try to get validation that the things that we are supposed to be getting into these students' minds in some form have been received. So we're kind of like pushed towards that knowledge transfer model. But that's all challenging for answers, the answers that we want. The but the questions drive the learning in a way. The questions drive that kind of environment that we were talking about. If if you're asking 90% review and procedural questions, where's the space for I'm trying the term you used earlier, the safe space for a productive struggle? What can we productively struggle with? It seems like it can only be remembering what you want because always the questions are about review or procedure that's sort of set. But those other like generative, constructive, and facilitative questions are the ones that we can use to really interact with students to challenge them for learning the way that we want learning to be. I think around understanding and those are essential questions. The questions we don't have the answers to, like the one I always mention is like, what do you think of when you think of gravity? Or what do you think of when you think of global warming? Or you think of climate change? Or you think about extinction or overpopulation of, something or um, and kids do think of things. They think of all
Absolutely.
different things. And to your point, the connections that they make can be really like wow, like kind of put you back on your heels and like wow, I never thought of that. I feel like I'm learning and thinking about new things, and I'm an adult and they're a third grader.
Mhm.
And to your point, like we don't have the experiences that these kids have, And so they bring all kinds of different things to the table, which again kind of help inform us about our world. So it's really begins to be um, a fun way of engaging with kids, but it also becomes a community of learners where we as teachers are also kind of participating and learning about our kids and learning about our skills. But yet, when I think about um, some of the examples you gave, constructive questions and facilitative questions, where it's like, tell me more about how you made that connection. Like, what makes you say that? Um, like that seems like to be the opposite of a bunch of other things we've talked about today. So anybody who's talked about one of these other things, like, where's Francis coming from? Like, do you see the support that he's leaning on here? Like, do you agree with him? Why do you think something completely opposite than what Francis thinks? And encouraging students to step into that safe space and really put themselves out there. And I think that speaks to the safety of it. And the more authentic these questions can be and the more authentic we can be, the more learning actually happens. And I think more of the kind of learning we want, again, to borrow from Ron Richard, who do we want children to become as a result of their time with us?
Mhm.
Because they're going to grow into the space that we create. And if that is only a little block to give us back an answer, that we're giving them, kind of square peg round hole, that's what it'll be. And I don't know, it feels like a really big challenge, but I know for myself, I found it very exciting, and it sounds like you did also.
Oh, definitely. That's so exciting and so worthwhile and so important in, where we have our students going off into this world that's very, very different from what I went off into. And to be able to struggle productively, to be able to communicate is is just so important. And all of these, everything we talked about involves seeing our students as people, listening to them, seeking to understand them. And that's such a shift. That's such a nice shift, is where the students had to seek to understand what we were doing. And I like when we talk about, having to really understand, we have to work to understand what's going on in our students' heads so we can help them bring it out
Mhm,
and struggle with it and struggle productively and feel good about it, even
mhm,
when there's going to be times when I don't feel good at this moment, but as I pressed on, I felt really good.
mhm. And I guess as we're wrapping up here, one thing I just want to say is that some folks might be listening to us and saying, this sounds great, but kids need to know facts. They need to know the truth. And they're not just going to come up with that on their own. And, so because we have these tests and we're held accountable to that. And unfortunately, as much as we would like to be doing what you're saying and so on and so forth, time doesn't allow for it because our time's full trying to get ready for testing. And I guess the point I want to make is that everything we're talking about is in the context of real life phenomena, processing and interacting with something specific, like the water cycle. The water cycle is what it is. It has the dynamics that it has. But if we can step into that and think about it and connect to it, create a safe space for students to make their connections known, agree and disagree with each other, and then go on a search for evidence for things that they don't understand to try to figure out if they work the way that they work. That's how students come to access the facts and develop the understanding. And through debriefing together, again, our job as teachers is to help them come to consensus around what the truth is, and that truth actually being the truth, not just, oh, we think plants can grow without water. Well, that isn't the
Right.
truth. So, so, so to those folks, I just want to kind of like bring us back and kind of ground us in that we're talking about something that exists within the context of phenomena and within the context of the standards. not purely some sort of free form back and forth. But nonetheless, I wanted to just give you a chance as well. What any key takeaways with that you'd like to make sure people walk away from this with?
The key takeaway for me is that it is okay as a teacher to be nervous about this and overwhelmed. And that's why I think we spent a lot of time really talking about, just as it's hard for kids to struggle at first, and it's hard for us as educators to watch them struggle, but the outcome is so powerful. And know that there are supports for that. We're not just asking you to just change everything, let them struggle. There are so many great opportunities, tools that we give you to help all the students struggle productively. And as you watch your classroom change and transform, it's such a positive thing. And I think about it all the time as I think about my classroom, but as I walk into other teachers' classrooms and watch the joy and the learning and the
Mm-hmm.
passion,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really remarkable thing to see.
Mm-hmm. And I think the final point I'd give is just that how learning happens at the point of challenge is through skillful teachers making the space for it and focusing students in a thinking oriented challenge, making the tasks focused on student thinking and not on the production of discrete rote facts. And just that in and of itself will, I think, be earth shattering for some folks to just see how much their students can change. So thank you so much, Judy, for your time. Again, I'm Francis Vigent, my colleague Judy Higgins, and if you'd like to take a look at any of the resources that we have for thinking routines and productive struggle, you can visit noadam.com and check out our resources section, thinking routines for teachers and classrooms, and also check out any sample lessons under our curriculum section. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.